Good morning again. I'm Karen Curtin, Regional Resource Director on Long Island for Caron Treatment Centers. Thank you for joining us for Caron's first installment in our national webinar series for 2021. Today's topic is putting first responders first through resilience, post-traumatic growth, and recovery. Today's presentation is eligible for 1.5 continuing education credits. We would like to thank our educational partner, CE Learning Systems, for assisting and providing these credits through co-sponsorship with the American Psychological Association. Please note that in order to receive your credits, you will need to complete the post-webinar evaluation, and a link will be emailed to you directly after the presentation. After finishing the evaluation, you will have immediate access to your certificate of completion. As a reminder, we will be conducting this session in webinar format and all participant microphones will be muted. During the presentation, please utilize the Q&A feature to ask any questions that you may have. Depending on the volume of questions, if we're not able to answer yours, we will have someone from our team follow up with you directly. Today, we welcome 2 presenters, beginning with our special guest, Michael Parmenter. Michael served as a member of the New Jersey State Police for over 26 years, where he was a detective in the auto theft and major crimes units and a lieutenant in the employee relations unit. After retiring, Michael was employed at the Living Grin Foundation's First Responders Addiction Treatment Program and by the state of New Jersey as their first responder program coordinator for the Department of Human Services, Division of Mental Health and Addiction Services, Disaster and Terrorism Branch. He currently serves as the Employee Assistance Coordinator for the New Jersey State Police. I am also proud to introduce John Becker, Jr., who is the director of Caron Treatment Center's First Responders Program. John has years of experience as a police officer, clinician, outreach professional, and program developer, as well as a strong understanding of substance abuse among first responders, having overcome addiction in his own life. John is also the clinical director of the Montgomery County Critical Incident Stress Management Team and certified by the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation for individual and group interventions. Additionally, John currently serves as Vice President on the Executive Board of the Greater Philadelphia chapter of the Employee Assistance Professionals Association. Michael will kick off today's presentation with his portion entitled New Jersey Law Enforcement Resiliency Program, a National Model. And then John will present on the importance of peer support in the treatment of first responders. We will then have time at the end to answer some of your questions. Now, please join me in welcoming Michael Parmenter.
Good morning, everyone. I'm coming to you from sunny South Jersey, and it's great to have the opportunity to talk to you about our resiliency program. I'm going to quickly share my screen and start the program. And if you have questions, hopefully I'll either see them or someone can bring them to my attention, or we'll try to answer them at the end, whatever works best for you. So give me one moment to share my screen. And I am going to hope that we don't have any technical issues along the way. Okay, the New Jersey Resiliency Program actually was adopted in August of 2019 by our Attorney General, Gerber Graywall. It follows basically a military model that was adopted by the FBI National Academy Associates, and then passed down through regional trainings to the state of New Jersey. A group of 23 of us received the initial training, and through that we are training additional trainers who will train the masses. We have about a 2-year window to complete these trainings, so all members of New Jersey law enforcement are going to receive this training. The actual training is about 2+ days in length, and what I'm going to do is give you an overview of what that training consists of. I've selected a few slides from each of the 12 areas, and we'll talk about it. Now, when we're talking about resiliency in law enforcement, my wife is a social worker, and if I were to talk to her about resiliency in her job, we're kind of talking about the same things. Resiliency is resiliency, and just because this is a law enforcement model, it doesn't mean at all that you can't take some of these ideas or suggestions here to utilize in your work life or your personal life. Again, this is my name and what I do for a living. I'm happy to work for the State Police Employee Assistance Program. We've been around since 1981, which is actually the year before I started with the State Police. And it's a great program. We have 6 employee assistance professionals that work with our civilian and professional staff. We have somewhere in the area of 3,000 state troopers and about 1,500 civilian professional staff. So lesson 1 is basically an overview of resilience. And what is resilience? It's something that in the face of stressors and changing demands, it's the ability to withstand, recover, and grow. This really sums up the whole resiliency program, because a lot of people think, well, there's a resiliency program, so we're going to talk about what happens after a traumatic event. But actually, resiliency picks up long before the traumatic event. So what we hope to do is provide resilience training that will kind of create an uplifting atmosphere, so that when that adverse traumatic event would happen, we can basically deal with it and gain post-traumatic adversity growth, or post-adversity growth, rather than post-traumatic stress. So what we hope to do through this is to enhance self-confidence, leadership, personal strength, spiritual growth, and an appreciation for life. And if you look at this, after the event happens, you see growth, or you can see the downslide where, there would be post-traumatic stress or a post-traumatic stress disorder, which would require treatment. So what we hope to do is basically go into a post-adversity growth. Why is it important? It's not just for those traumatic moments or to follow, but it's really about dealing with the daily hassles and stressors of life, and dealing with and having accomplishment despite those challenges and stressors. One of the things that we utilize is the broaden and build theory, and we can take a look at this. And if we utilize negative emotions, we see that we maybe start with a larger spiral and we spiral downward. But we can make the choice to utilize our positive emotions, and that's a lot of what this is about. We're going to take our positive emotions and actually build up from there. One of the first lessons that we do in the morning when we start this is counting our blessings. With this, one of the things that we try to do is we get our participants to write down 3 things that they're grateful for or thankful for. And typically they'll say, I'm glad I'm alive, or I'm glad I have this training, or I'm happy for my children, or I'm happy, that I have a great wife. And what we want to do is we want to actually ask them more. Tell us why, not just what, but why. And that helps us to cultivate gratitude, build optimism and positive thinking, cope with the daily hassles and stress, and improve the quality of life. And with our job, people don't call us because they're having a great day. They call us on their worst day. So our profession has a lot of negativity associated with it. And, if you look at the current climate of the last maybe 10 months or so, it's kind of been even worse. The pendulum is absolutely swung in a different direction against us. So gratitude is a sense of wonder, thankfulness, and appreciation of life. And we repeat this exercise. We actually get them to our participants to write on a sticky note, and then we place those sticky notes up against the wall for everybody to see. And then the next day they do the same thing, and it really presents a nice collage of gratitude, because we could all get up in the morning and think of all the things that are difficult, but if we take a moment to look at the things we're thankful for, it certainly changes the attitude. Again, it helps us cope with daily hassles, stress, and trauma, improves health, sleep, social relationships, progress on goals, and it promotes optimism and positive thinking. It increases our self-worth, our self-esteem, and it decreases depression, anxiety, and loneliness. Okay, one of the things that we have with most of the lessons, we'll have exercises, and one of the exercises that we'll do with this is actually writing a gratitude letter and encouraging our participants to share that letter with the person that they're wanting to express their gratefulness to. Um, One of the great things about this class is, and especially, with our class, it was a total of 23 people, and we got to know each other very well. And that's, you let your guard down a little bit. That doesn't happen often in law enforcement, where you're vulnerable with the people around you. And I think that this type of training gives you the opportunity to do that, so long as it is in a small atmosphere. Lesson 3 is accomplishing goals. So our objectives for accomplishing goals would be to gain a purpose of and feelings of control, to help us prioritize, to give insight about ourselves and our values, and to live our values, boost positive emotions, and improve self-esteem and self-confidence. We talk about the type of goals that we would like people to utilize, and those are SMART goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. Goals and values. Our values are our internal compass, the principles that guide and motivate us, the core beliefs that are most important. The goals are the paths that we take to get there, and they provide a good foundation for setting our goals. Goals, again, set based on your values. There are achievements along the way, and we have to find opportunities to live our values and find out, our why. Why are we doing what we're doing? What's the importance behind it? How do we accomplish a goal? We create a plan to overcome potential obstacles, and in doing so, we look for ways that we may trip over our goals. We must personally commit a goal, and if we share a goal with others, it kind of holds us accountable to a certain extent that we want to move that through, and then revisit that goal or our commitment to track our progress. ABC is lesson 4, and the objective is to be aware that your brain drives your reactions. We use ABC is your brain helping. So it helps us work towards goals, act upon values, improve performance, and strengthen relationships. So what we have is an activating event, a specific event that takes place, what takes place in our brain, and then the consequences of that. And those consequences can be a combination of emotional reactions and physical or behavioral reactions. As an example of this, a car changes lanes in front of me and I have to slam on the brakes to avoid an accident. My initial thought could be, I must have been in that driver's blind spot, or that was close, I should not drive so fast. I feel a little afraid, could be an emotional reaction. A physical reaction could be my heart races. Or I could take the negative approach. That driver cut me off on purpose. I'm so mad I could explode. I lay on the horn for a few seconds. And, we have the ability to make those choices. And how many times have we driven behind somebody white knuckled and angry because of something that they did that probably they may not even have realized, or maybe it's something that we did that we didn't realize. And, we can let go of all that by putting ourselves in a different place by using the ABC model. Check your playbook is lesson 5. And we want to look at what influences unproductive patterns, uncharacteristic reactions that are both emotional and physical, and what interferes with our performance, our goals, and our relationships. So we have a playbook. We do things a certain way. Maybe in a if this is the situation, this is how we're going to handle it. And it's based upon should patterns. That's should everything work out, should everything go as expected. But we also need to have an awareness of the plays that work and those plays that don't work. Playbook flags. Reactions interfere with performance, values, goals, relationships. Uncharacteristic reactions, pet peeves, dwelling on a problem, and unproductive pattern. Lesson 6, and it's kind of halfway through this. And I will tell you that, this is 240 some slides condensed to about 40 some slides. So there's a whole lot more to it. A lot of interpersonal communication, contact, just sharing. It's absolutely a different course for law enforcement. Now we're going to talk about balancing your thinking and instant balancing your thinking. The overview here is that we want to be aware of influences, of what influences unproductive patterns, characteristic reactions, interferes with personal goals and relationships. It kind of gives us the example of maybe not having all the facts in front of us when we open our mouth and say something that maybe we wish we hadn't. So some of the cognitive traps would be that all or nothing attitude. It's going to be my way or no other way. Confirmation bias, where you're using new evidence to support what you already believe, but that might be a biased belief already. Blaming others, blaming yourself, and mind reading, trying to be in a position where you are supposing that you understand what the other person actually means when you may not. Balance your thinking. These are 3 ways. Examine the evidence, support or disprove. And sometimes, we'll go into a situation and we'll think, well, why is this, why is it this way? Or why are we, why are they looking at that? And we're not looking at all the evidence. Sometimes we need to dig a little bit deeper and take a good look at things. Check for a double standard. Would I judge the others if they were to do the same thing? Or phone a friend. Does somebody else agree or disagree? This is something you can do if you're getting ready to maybe make a decision or, balance your thinking, trying to understand the situation. Run it by a friend. Run it by somebody that you trust, not a yes person that's going to agree with whatever you say, but somebody who's going to give you maybe some constructive feedback that would help. Capitalizing on strengths. And one of the things that we do with this is we allow the people ahead of time to, we send an email and we give them some information on a character strength survey, and they complete that survey and bring that with them for the day of training. So why does it matter? It's associated with positive incomes, greater psychological well-being, less stress, and lower depression. And our well-being is made up of so many things: health, family life, housing, work, leisure, security, social participation, financial security, learning, friends, hobbies, environment, and add your own things. What makes up your well-being? What makes you happy? Even just looking at today, social participation, a lot of time and learning. We would be doing things like this in a classroom environment, and now we're doing in this new computerized distant learning environment, which is certainly different. This is the values and action survey, and one of the things that you might want to do, and in the comments you'll see the link to this. You can take this survey yourself, and it's going to give you your 20 character strengths, the top signature strengths. And they may not be what you think that they are. You might be very surprised to see what they are. And I know I've done it a couple times, and some things vary a little bit, and it can change. But some of the things you can learn from this is maybe what you need to work on. And if something is more important to you, if being brave is more important to you, maybe work on your bravery. Or if you're not shown enough love, work on that area. But it will give you those signature strengths And those are things that you can change. We go into a little bit of mindfulness, acceptance, mindfulness, and meaning making. And one of the things when you're working with first responders, especially with law enforcement, with guys that have guns on their side that are sitting in the classroom, they're not always willing to, like close their eyes and get comfortable. We're usually the guys that are looking around the room, scanning for things, and getting somebody to be in that mindful state is a little bit difficult. We talk about acceptance and avoidance, and we run an exercise that where we have people not think of the white bear, and we give them a full minute, and we remind them during that full minute not to think of the white bear. And some people will have a some type of a method that they would utilize to avoid thinking of the bear. Maybe they would go into naming their relatives, or different colors, or people that they work with. They would find a way to do that. But others, when you're all they can think about is the white bear. So often when we try not to think about something, we actually think about it more. So the best thing to do would be to acknowledge and accept those things, and then move on from there. Mindfulness would be to utilize to acknowledge negative aspects of events, disengage from negative thoughts, reduce anxiety, allow for focus on what you can control, and take purposeful action on the things that you can't control. Again, mindfulness it's something difficult, but I even say, what, if you're not able to utilize mindfulness, maybe you're not comfortable with that yet. One of the suggestions that I always make is, find ways to separate work from home. And for us in the state police, we often travel to and from work. Some of us travel an hour and a half, an hour to work. And I know when I was a detective in the major crime unit, I would handle a lot of calls on my way home. And then I'd be sitting outside in the driveway waiting to finish my call on the way home. And my family would be looking out the window, and, then I'd finally get off the call. And it was just like walking right from my office into my home with no ability to kind of change my perspective or my mindset. What I try to tell people with that is, find a book on tape that you like, or listen to a podcast, or listen to music. Take some kind of an emotional break from work so that you're more prepared to meet and deal with your family. Mindfulness, as I'm sure you know, is a mental state of awareness, openness, and focus. It's being present at the moment, and it's certainly not easy. It takes practice. And one of the things that I start out with is, I had a friend who's a yoga instructor do a little 5-minute mindfulness, something simple, and I feel like that's been very, very helpful. I tried to show this video a little bit earlier. This is about Michael Jordan, and Michael Jordan in this video, he talks, we know that Michael Jordan is extremely successful in everything that he does, but he talks about his success, but highlights that he's also had a lot of failures in his life, where he's, failed to make the winning shot, or he's personally failed at different things at different times. And he succeeds only because he's failed at some things and has moved forward to succeed. If you get a second to watch this video, I would suggest that you do. Meaning making turns challenges into opportunities. A situation or experience that we have, does that mean anything else? Can anything good be realized as a result? Is there an opportunity present for me? Any lessons learned and that I can apply to the future? An opportunity to reinforce my core values and beliefs, any strength developed as a result. With this, I kind of go back to when I was about to start the State Police Academy in 1981. I went through a selection process, and it looked like I was getting in, and I received a letter that I was actually accepted to the 98th State Police class that was starting in September. I gave notice to my boss that I was working for and had been working for 7 years, that I was going to be leaving to go to the State Police Academy. And I got a second letter that academy opportunity was going to have to wait until March because they couldn't take the whole number of people. They had to split it into two groups. And it certainly was a difficult time for me to deal with that. I had left my job. They actually replaced me with somebody else. And I was talking to a couple of friends. They said, you know what, maybe you should try going to the National Guard. And I went in the Air National Guard. And during the time that I went through all my training, I learned some things that absolutely prepared me for what would lie ahead in the State Police Academy. And I really believe that had I gone to that 98th State Police class rather than the 99th, that I wouldn't have had that accomplishment. I wouldn't have been able to make it. I wasn't fully prepared. So sometimes we got to look at, what good things can be realized as a result. And that's certainly one of the biggest things that, certainly affected where I am today is, missing that first opportunity for a training opportunity. With meaning making, we want to focus on post-traumatic growth, a renewed appreciation of life, recognition of new possibilities, and understanding of enhanced personal strength, improve our relationships with others, and get a greater sense of meaning. Again, here's that slide that I started off with. And, I think this really talks a lot about, what we're doing with resilience training. And it's hard for people to separate, those traumatic events from resilience training. But the true understanding is that resilience training actually comes before the event. We talk about spiritual resilience, and we utilize our chaplains and some of our faith-based partners in presenting this. And they usually like getting involved, and there's even a version of this training that one of our chaplains is teaching. He's teaching the resilience for chaplains, and he's changed the slides up a little bit and done some things with this. And we see that this is going to change and adapt from county to department, from trainer to trainer. Everybody wants to put their own little spin on things, but they may very well know their audience and what their audience would see as the best things. So the goal here is to strengthen our set of beliefs, principles, or values that sustain our sense of well-being and purpose. We talk about having a board of directors, and really a spiritual board of directors. And those are peoples and ideas that positively or negatively influence you and form your worldview. I like to think of those that positively influence me, but sometimes the negative influences are, equally important. We can't have everyone agree with us, and sometimes we need some constructive criticism or some feedback or some negative things to happen to help us form our view of the world. So our board of directors would help us with the spiritual beliefs that are important to us. We don't want to understand how we came up with those beliefs, and think about yourself. And if you were to look at where you are in your career or in your life, who is it that's on your board of directors? I mean, I can easily put down a couple of names and think about people who have provided a great deal of influence with me, and people that I could go to if I needed some additional assistance that might be able to direct me in a better way. We touch on physical resilience and how important that is, so that we understand the link between physical and mental fitness, how we can improve performance, leadership, and overall health through resilience, physical resilience. We have discussion about nutrition and nutrition challenges, and discuss manufactured and processed food, the change in composition based on a change in diet of beef, dairy, and poultry. Talk about high fructose corn syrup and partially hydrogenated fats. And these aren't things that that I was always real familiar with, but it's interesting to hear those things and kind of try to put them into play as you, increase your resilience. Talk about strength and it being Miracle Grow for your brain. It increases energy, and you think about people who are able to, I'm sure we've all heard about people who get up at 5:30 in the morning, they go to the gym, and they have that increased physical energy, and they're more active during the day. It sharpens their focus, and they say that exercise improves focus 2 to 3 hours afterwards. And then in the long term, it prevents brain aging, Alzheimer's disease, and dementia. Talk about interpersonal problem solving in lesson 11. And these are things that, again, this is not, unique to law enforcement by any stretch of the imagination. We all deal with problems at work and at home, and, try to work on them from day to day. Interpersonal problem solving overview, it strengthens alliances by confronting problems in a respectful manner, using sustainable problem solving methodology, lower the intensity of interactions, and find mutually beneficial solutions. And when we think about this with problem solving, and when we're having a problem with somebody, sometimes those walls go up and we're not able to kind of bring it down. And when the walls go up, the hearing goes down, the understanding goes down, and we're less likely to come to a good resolution. We want to avoid mind reading. And again, what happens when we mind read, we make the assumption that we know what the other person is thinking. And, we're not always correct in that. Mind reading blocks communication. It's a cognitive trap. Situations for mind reading traps are close relationships, texting or emails. Sometimes we'll read a text or an email and we'll totally get the wrong idea, that we'll think that maybe somebody is being, too direct for us, or they're being aggressive with us, or, we'll read into it what's not there. And then, mind reading can happen when we're tired or stressed, when we don't really have the time or the ability to listen to somebody's side, and we, automatically make assumptions that aren't accurate, or when we're on autopilot, when we're busy, we're doing 10 things at once, and then somebody, throws something else in, and it's just, we're not ready for that. We're not totally processing it. We talk about constructive versus deconstructive conflict, and constructive conflict is managed. It leads to solutions and provides greater understanding and communication. Destructive produces barriers. It destroys morale and diverts energy from the important tasks or issues. Good listening and active constructive responding is actually the last chapter, and I'll just tell you now that we usually follow this up with providing resources and teaching our police officers how to assess resources, whether they be through utilizing an EAP, our Cop to Cop program in New Jersey, a lot of the different partners that we have in treatment, identifying therapists and doctors that can help us, utilizing our contacts with our unions or bargaining associations. We provide a list of things for them. As I say, a list, a series of slides, how to utilize your insurance card, and utilize the information on the back of it for assessing behavioral health care. So, with us, I think in the jobs that we have, and I can include all of us in this, is that we are in the, problem fixing business with people. And sometimes we hear we hear them a little bit, and we want to go right towards, directing our attention to that problem and give them some solutions or ideas on what they need to do. And everybody isn't always interested in us fixing their problem. Sometimes they just need someone to listen to them. And, good listening is something that makes people feel safe, in speaking to you as a confidant, knowing that, you're listening to what they're saying, not ready to either make judgment or suggest some type of a solution. Active constructive responding would be expressing involvement, excitement, or enthusiasm about another person's positive event. And we showed different examples of this through some great videos on how we can, encourage people to talk some more through active, constructive responding and good listening. The overviews and goals of this is to strengthen relationships, to respectfully confront problems, having sustainable problem-solving methodology, lower the intensity of interactions, and find mutual resolutions. The ABCs are attend with genuine interest, be responsive to what is said, care about the other person, don't interrupt, and encourage the person to say more. That's basically a quick, really a quick review of our officer resiliency program that we're utilizing in New Jersey. Again, this is from a military model that was adopted from the FBI National Academy Associates. It's being taught around the country through the National Academy Associates, and then different states are adopting this. I believe that New Jersey is the first state to have adopted this as a required training, and we intend to train all of our police officers within the next 2 years, that everybody receives this training. Each department, depending upon their size, will have at least one or more resiliency program officers. We're calling them RPOs. That would kind of lead this training and be a resource for members of their department. We try to pick people that are interested in helping others, that are approachable and have some credibility within their department. So I'm going to move on from here. I'm not sure about questions. I'm going to get off of this screen sharing. Okay, and I'd like to now introduce, if John wants to take over and pick up on his part at the end. If there's questions, we can answer them at the end, because I know there are some.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. So I'm going to share my screen. Mike covered a lot of interesting stuff related to law enforcement, and we're going to expand on that to get an understanding. When we're talking about resilience in law enforcement and among first responders, what do they need to be resilient from? So the goals of my part of this presentation is to talk about how peer-led, peer-integrated treatment is critical for positive recovery, highlight the aspects of the first responder cultures and how they contribute to unhealthy behaviors within the first responder community, and then to talk about the unique challenges in treating first responders, and then briefly touch on what we do within our own program here at Caron. There's a quick video that kind of really highlights expectations versus reality when we talk about first responders. And little disclaimer, a lot of the things we're going to talk about in this presentation don't apply to every first responder, but they apply to enough that it is a prevalent issue that we see it quite a bit. So we talk in generalities.
When I grow up, I want to be a police officer. When I grow up, I want to work for the FBI so I could go on secret missions.
When I grow up, I want to be a detective so I can investigate crimes. I want to be a police officer so I can keep people safe.
Because they're brave and I can help catch criminals.
When I grow up, I want to be a police officer so I can serve my country. I want to grow up being a cop.
Because I want to be in a position of authority.
Because girls can do it too.
When I grow up, I want to become a police officer so I can become isolated.
I want to be a police officer so I can have nightmares.
So I can see things that no human being should ever see.
So I can become void of emotion.
When I grow up, I want to be a police officer because I want to feel the emptiness inside. I'm so sad all the time.
You can't just toss me aside.
I don't understand what's happening to me. I'll never be the same.
I don't even go to family functions anymore. Disassociate.
Suicide.
They betrayed me.
I'm not a piece of garbage. No one should have to see what I have seen.
I may not be alone, but I am lonely.
Help me. Help me.
So that may seem a little extreme to some of us, but the reality is that's what's happening to a lot of our law enforcement officers, as well as other first responders. They begin the career in one place, and over time, they end up in a darker place. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the job first. We recognize that being a first responder, police officer, firefighter, EMS, corrections, military, all difficult and demanding careers. They all have proud traditions, and they all require extensive training and a mentality that is very decisive and unhesitating. People in these professions need to be able to quickly evaluate and respond to very complex situations, make split-second decisions, basically manage chaos at times. The first responder world is service-oriented. It focuses on citizenship and responsibility. Their members are taught to take care of everyone else, often to their own detriment. The first responder world is a closed system. And what I mean by that is either you're in or you're out. Either you're a police officer or you're not. Either you're, a firefighter or you're not. And that means a lot to this population. And we'll talk more about that. But first responders tend to relate better to their colleagues than others, to civilians, to use the vernacular. First responders almost inherently trust each other, but they're slow to trust civilians or folks outside of their professions. And we find that alcohol is a big part of the first responder culture throughout all of the professions. We also know that first responders, part of the culture is to hide your struggles and problems, and they are very good at it. When a first responder is having a difficult time, the last place that it usually appears or becomes apparent is at work. Their home life may be falling apart, but they pull it together when they put on that uniform and go to work and fake their way through. So usually by the time it gets to work, we know it's pretty bad. Poor overall self-care. Early on in a first responder's career, they tend to take care of themselves physically. They might eat healthy, exercise, and things like that. As time goes on, a lot of them get away from that for a variety of reasons. Shift work, schedule, eating fast food on the go, family obligations, things like that. So they get away from that physical health. But one thing that they neglect almost from the onset of their careers is their emotional and mental health. Not very good at taking care of those two things. The video kind of highlighted the expectations versus reality of being a first responder, right? When they enter that career, make that choice for that profession, they have visions of, making a difference, changing the world, things like that. And over time, the experiences that they have through that job often create a sense of cynicism and pessimism. And they kind of change their perspective where they can. And that the path to that retirement is not that straight line from expectation and being able to do the job and retiring. There's a lot of pitfalls and a lot of curves in the road, so to speak. Specifically, what are we talking about? First responders are exposed to a whole lot of things: abuse and death of a child, injured or killed coworkers, officer-involved shootings, the homicides of civilians, suicides, fatal car wrecks, failed rescues, all kinds of assaults, physical and sexual. These are things that police officers and other first responders are exposed to on a daily basis, right? The average person may have 1-2 critical incidents in their whole lives that they're exposed to. And these professions are seeing these on a daily basis. Additionally, in spite of what they often try to portray, police officers and other first responders are human beings, and they're affected by other emotions, right? Being insulted, being harassed, humiliation, sometimes from their peers, sometimes from the community, the media. These all tend to have an impact on a first responder's well-being, and we often don't pay attention to that. First responders do not like feeling helpless. An example would be if a firefighter is trying to make a rescue in a fire and he's unable to get to that person, and they end up dying. there's a lot of guilt and bad feelings that come along with that feeling of helplessness that they weren't able to help. And that can be very difficult. There's also, a lot of these situations, there's an avoidance of what many would consider certain death, right? Coming out of a critical incident alive, carries its own series of feelings and reactions. And finally, the futility of it all. As a first responder spends more and more time in their career, the longer they're at it, and they start to see things like, the same people coming back around, either committing criminal acts, or, they're just involved with them, EMS calls to the same places. They can kind of feel like they're not making a difference, and there's a certain futility to it, which can have a negative impact on their emotional and mental wellness. So when we talk about stress within the first responder community, it doesn't always present like it would with the average person. First responders are natural and proficient crisis interveners. They thrive in chaos. They handle it well. You give them a problem, a volatile situation, and they'll come in and they'll handle it. And they do that regularly. They go from call to call, just moving through those chaotic situations. Stress for a first responder tends to present itself in the more mundane, everyday issues, and they find them difficult to deal with. And we're going to get into a little bit why that is, why at work they're thriving to an extent, and at home they seem to be failing. But it's things like chores, things like bill paying, family matters, social activities that they tend to struggle with or neglect, or, you come home from work and all you want to do is sit on the couch. You don't want to be bothered and you tune out, right? That's an indication. When it happens once, maybe it's an indication that they're tired. If it's repeatedly happening, it might be an indication that there's a problem going on. A big problem for first responders is organizational stress. No matter what type of agency, no matter what size of agency, when you talk to the members about their biggest stress, top two or three answers is always organizational stress. Things like inadequate training, lack of support, unfair assignments, things like that. Politics comes into play. So organizational stress is a big one for first responders, and it's often one that they can't really do anything about, right? It's just there. It's something that you need to learn to adjust to. The impact of the job. First responders are exposed to many critical incidents. Law enforcement, for example, it's estimated that the average law enforcement officer will experience 188 critical incidents in their career on average. And, depending where you work, that could be up or down. Exposure to these hazards will change a first responder's personality, right? They come in hopeful and happy and wanting to change the world, and they start to, become negative about it. And those changes, their negative attitudes not only impact their work life, but they often take that home with them. And the skills that they develop to survive the job, right? Not only to go home safely, but to survive it emotionally and psychologically, don't always translate into their personal lives. Often they're very detrimental to their personal lives. First responders experience problems with diet and shift work, right? Law enforcement works 24 hours, fire service, EMS. It's not a 9-to-5 job, and they often work rotating schedules. So there's, added stress around sleep and things like that. Just like everybody else in the world, first responders experience job family stress, right? It's part of being, it's part of the human condition. We see sometimes in law enforcement and other first responders that there's spousal abuse, and that can be verbal, physical, sexual, and it can go both ways. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it happens enough that it's something that we want to look at and look for when we're working with first responders. A lot of first responders are suffering from depression and anxiety because they're not managing their critical incidents or their stress, right? They're stuffing them down and moving on to the next one, and it tends to affect them and or come out sideways. And the lack of self-care really contributes to these problems, these critical incidents, the stress, the schedules, the challenges at home, the missing of holidays, things like that. If we're taking care of ourselves physically, emotionally, and psychologically, we're better able to handle that. If we're neglecting that, they become even more pronounced. Some other things that first responders struggle with: unresolved traumatic stress, right? All of the critical incidents they're involved in and all the traumatic events that they're either witness to or experience the aftermath of can stay with them. When we see that when they come into treatment, they don't often recognize that they have been impacted by the traumas that they've seen or experienced until we start to talk and look at that, right? A lot of first responders are type A personality, go-getters, self-starters. They don't need a whole lot of direction. They tend to handle situations on their own and very well. And that can be a negative when they're struggling or when there's a problem. It keeps them from acknowledging and addressing a problem. And then finally, suicide. Suicide in the first responder world is a significant problem. And we're going to talk a little more about that in further slides, but the numbers are high. Suicide in the first responder world is roughly, for law enforcement example, it's twice as many police officers kill themselves as are killed in the line of duty. And the fire service, for the first time about a year or two ago, also reached that level. So that's a significant problem. And the other services, it's also high. The military, we have 22 veterans committing suicide a day. So there's a lot of issues related to suicide in the first responders. So through studies, we know that first responders that experience ongoing stress are more likely to display anger, distance themselves from their family members, and have unsatisfactory relationships. They're carrying around that anger and that grumpiness because they're just stuffing everything inside, and it comes out, as anger often because it's a comfortable emotion for first responders. It's easier to be angry than fearful or disappointed. So that default is often anger, and how that presents can be things like distancing themselves or isolating and things like that. With all the trauma that first responders are exposed to, there's a lot of ways that they will react to that. I've highlighted two on this slide: trauma blocking and trauma splitting. These are the two that we see quite often with first responders. Numbing activities, the trauma blocking. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to feel it. So I'm going to drink, I'm going to drug, I'm going to gamble, I'm going to whatever. Temporary fix, right? To take their mind away from it. The other is trauma splitting. First responders believe that they can compartmentalize their lives. I keep work at work. I'm not going to let that affect my home life. So I'm going to put anything that happens at work in a little box, and then I'm going to go home and do my thing. The reality is it doesn't work. It ends up spilling over into their family lives, and the impact can be pretty pronounced on the family, when it goes unaddressed. Now, the first responders will also engage in a lot of the other reactions that are on this slide, but these two are what we see quite a bit of. Post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Not everybody has the disorder, but I think the majority of first responders have some sort of post-traumatic stress symptoms over the course of their career, and some of it they carry with them. Witnessing too much death, and can often include a coworker. Just the way human beings treat each other. They're on the front line and get a front row seat for all the horrible things that people can do to each other. Physical, sexual abuse of others, police death and or shooting can be traumatic. And this last one, discovering the monster within. And what that refers to is often, we want our first responders to be guarded against falling into losing their humanity because they get so caught up being in that environment of negativity and loss and trauma that they forget what they're fighting for and kind of lose that empathy and that humanity that put them into these professions to begin with, right? And often they can become the thing that they were fighting against. So the emotional well-being of a first responder. From a first responder's perspective, right, they see the world differently than most people, and that evolves over time. As I mentioned, they become cynical, pessimistic, and they often develop a distrust of human nature, right? Everybody has to prove themselves. And part of that is that necessity to survive, that hypervigilance that most first responders practice, and in part because they need to. It helps keep them safe on the job. It helps them get home at night. First responders tend to see the world from a threat-based perspective. They need to do that on the job. The problem is they can't turn it off when they get home, a lot of them, right? So everything's a danger until I say it's not. I don't trust anyone until they prove worthy of my trust. And that's the mindset for a lot. Along with their emotional well-being, and this kind of goes to my earlier point about being at work and being able to effectively do the job, manage chaos and crisis, but then coming home and being tired, detached, isolated. It's that cycle of hypervigilance, right? We go to work, we're alive, we're alert, we're energetic, and we feel good. Maybe we work a 12-hour shift and then we go home. We're drained, right? We don't go back to normal. We're going to go below normal because it's kind of a crash. And then what happens is eventually we'll cycle back to that normal range. But in the first responder world, unfortunately, it takes about 18, 24 hours for that cycle to happen to get back to that normal range. Most first responders don't have 24 hours off in between their shifts. 8 to 12 is usually what they have. So they end up riding a roller coaster between being hypervigilant and being down, right? Below that normal sense of wellness to being feeling isolated, apathic, tired, detached, apathetic. I said that wrong. And what happens is that's what their loved ones get to see. That's what they experience. They don't see the alive, alert, energetic, involved, humorous, family member. Now, this isn't for every police officer. When someone gets caught in this and they're struggling and the family's noticing this, it's usually somebody that needs some assistance, right? They've gotten into a place where they're not able to manage their stress, their critical incidents, their whatever. And it becomes apparent at home first. Hypervigilance can be fun and exciting early on in someone's career, right? You go to work, it's fun, you're putting out fires, you're chasing bad guys, those types of things. It's a lot of fun. But over time, it takes a physical and emotional toll, right? And extended periods of that can really wear if we don't find a way to balance that hypervigilance and manage it. The average citizen sees the world as a safe place generally, right? And they don't need to be hypervigilant 24 hours a day. It's more situational. You're walking down the street, it's dark, you hear a noise behind you, the hair on the back of your neck maybe stands up, and you turn around and you realize it's your neighbor walking up the street and you relax, right? First responders tend to be hypervigilant from the moment they wake up till they go to sleep. An example, most police officers I know, whether they're on the job 10 minutes or they've been retired 20 years, when they go into a restaurant, find a seat where they can see everything. They want to see the entrances, the exits, and they want to see everything in the restaurant they can. They put their backs to the wall. It's just in their genetic DNA, that hypervigilance to be safe, at the local restaurant. Most people don't even think about that stuff. So this is what first responders are dealing with on a regular basis. We know there's issues with a first responder when we see things like they're tuned out at home. They come home, they're sitting on the sofa, they're vegging, maybe they're staring at the TV, flipping through the channels with the clicker, or they come home and they jump on the video game, the Xbox, whatever, and they sit there for 2 or 3 hours until they go to bed. They're not engaged with the family. Their hobbies and activities have gone away. Things that they normally would take care of promptly are being put off. And a big sign is they avoid going home, right? All of a sudden, this first responder is working a lot of overtime that's not mandatory. They're volunteering for extra shifts, they're taking on assignments and details and things like that. They're avoiding to go home, and it can be for a lot of reasons, but often it's because they don't like the way they feel when they get home. So if they stay at work or they continue to work extra, they get that elevated feeling from being hypervigilant that they've seemed lost at home, right? So that is a big part of why they'll tend to work overtime and avoid going home. And of course, alcohol, substance abuse is often a big coping mechanism for first responders. And it can start for a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's just a habit that gets away from them, self-medication, injuries on duty. And we know with trauma and PTSD, they go hand in hand often. So, they're at a greater risk for that to begin with. Within law enforcement, 25 to 30% report abusing alcohol on a regular basis, which is far above the national average. Lifetime of adverse effects, very pronounced among law enforcement. When we look at firefighters, approximately 50% of them report binge drinking in the past month. The threat of alcohol abuse among firefighters is double that of the general population. Circling back to suicide, I mentioned that more suicides kill themselves, or more police officers kill themselves than are killed in the line of duty. Firefighter, any department is 4 times more likely to experience death by suicide than die in the line of duty. Veterans, 21% higher than civilians. So we know it's a great risk for first responders. So what does that all mean when we're talking about peer stuff and their resilience and tying that all together? First responders are reluctant to trust and always want to be in control. Admitting they have a problem means they're not in control. They don't want to be seen as weak. They don't want to be judged. There's a fear of the stigma of asking for help or having a problem. And they worry about job consequences. And so they consistently internalize their problems and work very hard to hide them. In order to reach a first responder and to kind of get them the help they need, it's important to create a safe environment in which they are able to discuss their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Part of that involves tapping into the culture, the traditions, the symbols, and the ideals that are important to first responders, creating that environment where they feel comfortable. There's a natural bonding that takes place among first responders that, when tapped into, can be used as a protective factor. Some of the barriers that we have, is kind of teaching first responders how to deal with stress. They've built resilience, as Mike talked about, in the course of their careers, but it's often unhealthy resilience, and we have to refocus that. Being a hero that's willing to be emotionally vulnerable, right? That S on their chest, they need to put that aside and be willing to be vulnerable. Developing a sense of meaning outside of a career. Most first responders, if you ask them who they are, the first thing they're going to tell you is, I'm a firefighter, I'm a police officer. And then that's the end of the sentence. If you ask a civilian, who are you? Oh, I'm Joe, I'm an accountant, I got a family and a wife. And that's not to mean that those things aren't important to first responders, but they so strongly identify with their role as a first responder that's what they see. We want to help them process trauma related to the life and death decisions and the other critical incidents they've been involved in, and rediscover or find that balance between family and career. Now, when we talk about first responders, some of the personality traits that you'll find that are very common. suspicious, risk-taking, insecure, authoritarian, honorable, trustworthy, loyal, all make sense. They can be cynical, they can be hostile, they tend to be conservative and reserved, still individualistic. They're very efficient when given a task, and they're also prejudiced. And what I mean by that has nothing to do with race, gender, religion, anything like that. First responders are prejudiced against anyone that's not one of them, right? It's that, either you're in or you're out, either you're one of us or you're not. Now, when you talk to a first responder and ask for their view of mental health professionals, what they'll tell you is, and I exaggerate a little bit for the effect, but they're liberal, soft, tree-hugging, neurotic hippies, and you can't trust them because they don't live in reality, and they're actually scared of us, and they're trying to get us off the street. That's the mentality that you often see when you're dealing with first responders, and that's a wall that needs to be overcome. So what we try to do in our program, and it works, is by incorporating peer services into the treatment and into developing that resilience and just supporting first responders, you're able to break down those barriers to clinical mental health treatment, and it opens the door to begin that work, right? Creating a safe environment, respecting confidentiality, using the peers to break down defenses, and then helping them to reconnect with a sense of self, family, friends, values, things like that. Getting them to a point where they're able to discuss their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, not just with their peers, but within the clinical setting, and shifting them away from the negative, right? Focus on the positive. Because they see such horrible things in their careers, they tend to focus on the negative, and it's really shifting it away from that and getting them to see that that is really just a small part of what the world has to offer. It's also really important to provide ongoing services. Aftercare, as we know, is key, and continued peer involvement. Providing a network of first responders to continue to support, their fellow members after they complete treatment. So that's kind of the idea behind the peer approach and treatment of first responders. They're very resistant to getting help, asking for help, and even accepting help once they get there. But by utilizing the peer approach and tapping into their resilience, we can engage them in treatment and have positive outcomes. Thank you.
So thank you, Michael and John. I think we have a few minutes. We can take some of the questions that we received during the registration process. And then any question that we don't get to today, we will be following up with each of you both directly, both from the live questions and the ones that came in through the pre-registration process. So the first question, I'm going to just read it, and you guys can probably just field it however you'd like to handle it. Are there recovery groups specific to first responders? And if so, how do I find them?
You're muted, Mike.
Unmute yourself, Mike.
If you don't know about them, it's kind of like a little bit of a secret, but there are programs for first responders, and a lot of them can be assessed through different treatment facilities that have first responder programs, bottles and badges, and maybe knowing someone who's a first responder in recovery might want to know, might be able to provide that answer. John and I worked together when COVID started to put together a list of remote first responder meetings because physical meetings were not available. And we tried to share that carefully with the first responder community.
Yeah, and if I could follow up, Mike, nationally, there are a lot of resources and a lot of recovery meetings available for first responders. Unfortunately, there's no single location to kind of find them. Over the last 10 years, I've kind of put together a real good comprehensive national list. And as Mike mentioned, a lot of treatment centers offer that. And what we do, it's actually part of our program here at Caron with the first responder program, is we have 3 peer facilitated meetings a week. We call it the resilience and recovery meetings, and they're facilitated by a peer. With COVID, they're virtual right now. And we're gonna keep them virtual even after we go back to in person, because the reach has been so great and the response has been so great. And it's no longer local; it's more of a national type approach to recovery.
Thank you, guys. So I think it's like one of the silver linings from COVID really is the fact that we can reach people with some of our great groups that we have all around. The next question is, how does vicarious trauma play a role with first responders?
Yeah, I tried to touch on that a little bit. First responders, just by the nature of the job, are exposed to, a lot of critical incidents in the aftermath of those critical incidents. Even if, they're not the participant of the critical incident or the traumatic event, they're left to deal with the survivors, the family, and just the aftermath. So, and they carry that with them. So it definitely has an impact. And there's not a whole lot of data on vicarious trauma in first responders, but the few studies that are out there have shown that first responders are at a 35% greater risk of developing post-traumatic stress around vicarious trauma, just because of the volume of incidents that they're exposed to. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is, how is trauma best treated in the context of an EAP?
If I can answer that, I think that starting out early, having your EAP appear at the academy, talk to new recruits, and let them know that that we're going to see some abnormal things, and that we are there to help. One of the things that I try to do is I try to take an approach with the brand new troopers. They're easy to identify because we're a badge numbered society, and I can look at the high badge numbers and say, this guy's a new guy, let me reach out to them. I think that taking proactive action when you see a new trooper maybe dealing with their first child death or their first suicide or fatal accident, reaching out to them, making a phone call and saying, hey, what you saw today could be troublesome to you. It may not be, but these are the things that we see, and we can build on this by talking about it, by having an understanding that it's not what everybody else in the world sees. It's not normal or always acceptable, but you're going to see this stuff, and we build upon that and establish like early contact, letting them know that talking about it amongst each other, with their supervisors, with EAP, is really a good alternative.
Thank you, Michael. Next question, it's a little long, but a therapist asked, I see a lot of family members of first responders in my therapy practice, and oftentimes the first responders themselves don't wish to seek help. Have you any suggestions on how we can better engage them?
So, yes. As I tried to highlight, first responders don't like to ask for help, and they don't like to accept help even when they ask for it. But they do like to help people that they love, right? So if it's a family situation and we can get that first responder engaged under the premise that they're doing this for somebody else, it often opens the door for them to engage and maybe discover that it's beneficial to them as well. The only other suggestion I would have is, involving peers is critical. And Mike can probably speak more to that from what he does with the New Jersey State Police, but involving a peer to talk to that first responder often will help push them towards, okay, you know what, I'll give it a shot. It's not a guarantee, but they're more receptive to that than an actual mental health professional.
Yeah, if I can just follow up with that, I'm fortunate to be in the position of being an EAP, but also being a peer, and to be able to talk to them on that level and encourage them to go to counseling, but also recommend them to counselors that we know that have worked with other first responders to some degree of success, and that the other first responders have found comfort in dealing with them goes a really, really long way. And I think it's one of the important things that we can offer.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more. What are the most difficult issues when treating a first responder?
Yeah. So the first, right off the top of my head, is their inability to accept or acknowledge that they need help, right? Even when they come in the door for treatment, they still struggle with wanting and thinking that they can control whatever their issue is. So that's one of the big barriers to try and overcome, to get them to see, like, you're not doing so well managing and controlling this, and utilizing, peers to show that it's okay not to be perfect, right? You don't have to be the fixer, the problem solver, the helper all the time. It's okay to take some time for yourself. For me, that's always been the biggest obstacle when it comes to getting them to engage in treatment. Yeah.
I think John did cover a lot of those obstacles too in his slide presentation.
Yeah.
Well, it is 12:30, so I just want to thank the presenters again today for some really helpful information. As a reminder, this presentation is eligible for 1.5 continuing education credits. Please remember to watch your email for a link to complete your evaluation. And also, Caron is offering several more great webinar opportunities throughout the month of January. For those of you interested in PCB credits, we are offering a webinar next week entitled Relapse and COVID-19, Finding Hope in Recovery, which is on Tuesday, January 12th from 12 to 1. Next week, we also have Caron, Florida, doing a webinar called Individual and Family Recovery, a Parallel Process. That's Wednesday, the 13th from 11 to 12, and that's 1 social work credit. Later this month, we will have 2 additional webinars listed on your screen. I think that should be up there now. Please watch your email, visit our website for more details and to register. And in the meantime, please reach out to your local regional resource director for additional information, for resources in your own area, or for questions regarding admissions to any of Caron's programs. Thank you for joining us and have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye all.
Bye.